All right, let's get started. Block's Q3 Postmortem, short and quick. I'll be in San Francisco in a couple weeks at the Investor Day, so see you there. If you're there, ping me. We can, grab coffee or something. So you're listening to Avery's Around the Desk podcast, where we dig into markets, companies, and ideas shaping what is coming next. I'm Sean Emory, co-founder and chief investment officer here at Avery & Company in Miami. Come check us out. Quick reminder, though, this conversation is for informational purposes only. Should not be considered investment advice. We may hold positions in some of the companies discussed. Please do your own research before making any sort of investment decisions. So we are investors in Block, just for disclosure purposes. A little background there, 2016 to around 2021, we made our first investment, did really well with it, sold it, in the moments of frenzy, and re-engaged with the story here over the last, right around these levels in terms of pricing. And today is a postmortem on their Q3 2025 results. I think some of this setup, post-earnings, would have envisioned a market reaction that was incredibly favorable. If you think about it in some context of the why, Block came into the year somewhere around, $90 a share, some momentum in terms of perception from the investment community. Sold off a little bit post the Q1 to Q2 guide. And we're back to that same guide, meaning numbers have ratcheted up, except this time I think the construct of that growth is different. Growth is now accelerating both on Square and on Cash App. We have a new name in the mix, our new ecosystem, call it the Proto mining for Bitcoin mining. Also seeing some revenue growth here. But both ecosystems, the core, Cash App and Square, are showing real momentum again, and this time feels, fairly durable. And I'll tell you a little bit why. So let's start with Cash App momentum, because ultimately I think, the investment community, this is the heartbeat of the business in terms of, future growth, just given the optionality that I think a digital wallet has. Some of the numbers, primary banking actives, which is a big number that they are providing to really illustrate those that are, a little bit more entrenched in the ecosystem, that hit 8.3 million, growing 18% year over year. They gave some intra-quarter, meaning some October numbers as well, and those numbers accelerated once again. Inflows per active or transacting active, up to about 1366, and then gross profit per active up 25% year over year. So very healthy numbers, in a world where people are, talking about the macro, being weak or weakening. And ultimately, I think, the markets in general are very focused on the macro over the micro, focus more on some of these more, again, AI initiatives, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, Cash App, Square, Block is, performing pretty well here. So all of those numbers I just gave, primary banking actives, gross profit per active, that's the compounding we do want to see. They have their Cash App Borrow product, which again, they've been discussing this for, some time here, which is expanding that across the country and doing so in a prudent way. Yet, if you look at the numbers, they're pretty incredible. Origination volume up 134% year over year. And they're keeping loss rates, sub 3%. And I think this is important. And I think Amrita, the CFO, illustrated the context or importance of a borrow customer. And I wrote a little piece on X just really articulating why I think, there's something special here. Borrow users are 3x more engaged, 2x more card spend, and 3x higher retention. They hold direct deposits, they use Cash App Card, they trade, stocks and, some of the Bitcoin stuff, and they send, peer payment to payment, all of which I think makes it, much stickier, higher retention. And so when you take those nuggets, and we know that, gross profit, per active, is somewhere around $94, at a loss rate of 3% for the borrow customers, I think ultimately borrow customers are net accretive to the entire ecosystem by a long shot. And incrementally, again, activity from a borrow user far exceeds that 3% loss rate. And it, instead of it being, kind of this lending risk, because they have this ecosystem of other ways to monetize, it really becomes a growth engine. and you can monetize the customer outside of the loss rate, which again is sub 3%. So they're showing, their ability to scale and manage, their loss rates on that product. So it's great. On the Square side, this continues to accelerate. GPV came in at $67 billion, double-digit growth, some of the fastest growth they've seen in quite some time. In terms of, that's $250 billion of payment volume going through their ecosystem. So this is a big player growing double digits in a macro economy that people are questioning. So I'm not sure how the numbers are showing up there, but mid-market sellers were up 20%. So they're seeing some of these larger sellers, these cohorts. They landed their largest Canadian customer with 80 locations. They landed Katz Deli, which is obviously a signature name, and food and beverage, new volume added, or volume in general, like it went from 2% growth a couple years ago to 30% now. So again, there's a major shift happening at Square. I think Nick Molnar, who came with the acquisition of Afterpay, was on the earnings call. Very, very strong executive, and he mentioned a couple different facts that I'll share here real quick, which is number one, 70% of new volume is still coming in from self-onboarded sellers. So there's still this like organic, product-led motion, but they are growing their sales force. So they had, roughly 90 field sales reps. So people in the field, selling to sellers, to onboard. And that again, that's showing and assisting in some of the acceleration here. But then you have an interesting nugget that he shared, which I think is super important when we think forward. Everyone's concerned about generative AI and some of search going from Google search, traditional search, blue links to more of this generative ecosystem where the answer is essentially given to you. And he made the nugget that Square ranks number one for AI related SMB search keywords on these platforms. So I think if you're also thinking about future proofing a sales-led or a product-led model, they're insulated there as well. So they have people in the field. I think he mentioned that in October that there's already over 100 field sales reps. So they've already added, call it 10, 15% more people to their sales motion. Now, I think some of the story around AI was totally non-existent in this, and I expect to see more here at the Investor Day coming soon. But I think this was missed, and I think it's important to understand how deeply embedded it seems like AI is happening within Block. We're focusing on the accelerating growth. I think that matters a lot. But under the hood, I think there's a full transformation happening. Block built its own open source AI operating system called Goose. And on the call, they said every single person at the company now uses Goose in their workflows. I think that's wild, to think about. And I would love to see that in motion. But it's driving productivity for the business, real cost leverage. We see that in the numbers. It's becoming really an operating layer for the entire company. And we're already seeing signs of that kind of roll out across into the product. A month ago, Square launched, their AI-driven tools across, restaurant management, finance in terms of companies managing their business on Square, and retail as well. Really helping, these owners analyze performance, automate tasks, and, make ultimately smarter decisions. And that's how I think they can scale their software. But ultimately, I think what it could do as well is drive retention as you embed it across, the ecosystem. It would make it harder to switch. So I think that's important. And it's not just Square. Goose is also possibly, or just AI in general, I think it's likely going to show up here in Cash App soon. And I say that because there was a little nugget on the earnings call where he mentioned that they're investing in AI capabilities that, one day could extend into kind of like investment-related products. So my take on that is simple: is Cash App will become much more of a portfolio investment product. That's my hope. But also it seems like that is potentially on the roadmap. Again, next week we'll get a Cash App announcement on product. So let's see what happens there. But I expect more investment related solutions over the next 3 to 12 months in Cash App, which would be pretty powerful. Last couple things here. I think execution is happening. It's a subtle shift that I don't think people are listening to, let's say. I think the clear visibility or the clear signal here is that Jack took a backseat on the earnings call. Jack Dorsey, who's, founder, CEO, visionary. Instead, you had, Owen and Nick Molnar, who led the discussion for the most part and led the Q&A. And ultimately, you're taking, they're visionaries too, obviously in their own right. But they're taking, a forward-facing role, and, they're the ones really like executing the day-to-day. So it's a big change. I think it's a big signal. I think while, I actually, as a two-time investor in Square at the first and Block now, have appreciated Jack. I think he's, one of the best visionaries and one of the best entrepreneurs, out there, period. But in some ways he gets, a bad rap from the investment community for different reasons. But, not from us. But ultimately, I think bringing some of the people that are executing day to day and also visionaries in their own right is a smart move. Now, there's also Proto, and I expect to hear more from this on Investor Day, but, it generated roughly $29 million in its first quarter ever. Again, this is Proto mining, their Bitcoin mining rigs, beautiful devices, competing against Bitmain, which is the largest out of China. If we're trying to create and mine Bitcoin locally in the U.S., clearly, Proto mining is set up well to be the infrastructure for that. What's next? I think Catalyst, coming up. I articulated this a little bit in, a little post here, but Cash App product announcements are coming next week. I think this could be, let's just wait and see. But at the end of the day, we're a week away from Cash App product announcement. Again, goes back to the idea that management is much more focused on articulating to not only the investment community, but to the, the community more widely that, there's a new strategy here. They had their Square launch, product events, Cash App launches. So there's this incentive or, initiative to be front-facing on product announcements. Number 2 is Investor Day. So we got new products from Cash App in a week, and then 2 weeks from now, we have Investor Day in San Francisco. I expect, 2026 guidance, deeper economic analysis on whether it's borrow or some other things, some cohort insights. And then I expect some more stuff on, obviously, AI, just given that it's front and center today, and would love to hear something about Proto, see where it is, how do they make money there, software, hardware. But ultimately, look, my takeaway is, this is clearly execution in motion. Both ecosystems are accelerating. AI is being embedded across the stack internally and externally, and leadership feels more operational than ever. They have the vision. Now you operate. It shows up in the numbers, top line, bottom line. When you connect all these dots, borrow, Goose, self-onboarding, Proto mining, you really have multiple layers of compounding. And, that's how I'm thinking about it. So, future looks bright for Block. We're on the train. So that is it for Around the Desk Post-Mortem. If you haven't checked out, all our other work, we have other podcasts on, different things that are happening across this space. So see you next time.